So, Coach, I know we've done this multiple times, but still, can you introduce yourself a little bit for the audience?
Absolutely. I appreciate it. Yeah. So, I started out in physical education. Um, my degree was at SUNY Cortland in the center of New York. Yep. And part of the SUNY system there. And Cortland was known for physical education, very good school. And, my dad and my brothers and sisters were all teachers. My brothers and my dad were phys ed and coaches and ADs and eventually administrators. So, that was kind of what I grew up in. And then I started out teaching right off, and I coached three sports. And then quickly, after a couple of years, I went into strength and conditioning. And so I kind of went back and forth in phys ed and always running my business on the side, though, training athletes and consulting. And then, till today, I still, I do a lot of consulting. As you know, I just finished training a client, an athlete, and I'm also coaching. I'm coaching high school basketball. So kind of going full circle again.
Nice, nice. So what we're going to talk about today is actually with correlate with basketball because me and Adam we just did a tour on 11 D1 Power 4 school,
Mm,
and a lot of them are like top 25 this year. And
got it.
we went there to use like force plate and 1080 to test their like basically it's XYZ axis of deceleration. So on the force
Hmm.
plate we test counter movement jump, counter movement rebound, drop jump from different heights, and then single leg counter movement, single leg drop jump. And on the 1080 we use like 10-meter lead in decel, 5-meter lead in decel, and then 505 and lateral shuffle.
Yep.
So I want to start by like asking this. So like we mentioned, XYZ axis of deceleration. Like, um, do you think that we should train different movement patterns or like focus on like vertical, it will translate to like linear or lateral?
So just so I'm clear, you're meaning like if we trained landing mechanics to decelerate mass, that possibly could help us transfer.
Yeah, yeah.
That's okay. I think there certainly is a percentage that would transfer, but what we have to consider is if we're going to train vertical or localized vertical landing, at some point we're going to have to include some kind of influence on rotational deceleration of the upper torso, which will link down through the pelvis, which then will link down through the femur, the tibia, the ankle, and everything. So, and the reason I'm saying that, Eric, is because if I'm running forward 5 yards, 5 meters, whatever, and I decelerate in what we call a lunge stop, which would be 1 foot in front, and I stop, there's an element of the transverse plane that's going to be a huge predictor of how well I decelerate. When I'm coming down vertically, I still will get an element of that, but if I land parallel stance, it reduces the demand of the rotation at the high speeds. So that would be my only thought. I think by training landing mechanics, I think it helps tissue quality, because of the stress you're placing on it. I think it helps proprioceptive feedback in the joint, the pressure proprioceptives of the tissues, making sure that we're being able to manage the speed and being able to decelerate that speed. So I think you can, but I don't think it would be complete without actually having the horizontal forces coupled with transverse forces, and I think that that's going to be important.
That's actually pretty cool because what we found, like not gonna say what we found, but what we like observed or what we saw is like if some of those schools like they actually a lot of them like if they implement some kind of like Gary Gray like 3D map,
Yeah.
those kind of stuff, they actually move pretty well. It shows on the number that they
Yeah.
actually move pretty well on like all like component of deceleration.
Yeah.
Is that but here's the thing. Like uh you're probably gonna hate me for asking this, but
No, no.
but like people say that's fascia training.
Yeah.
So can you kind of share your thoughts on like you mentioned like rotational stuff, which
Yeah.
makes sense to me. And like nowadays people use like these like terms. Yeah, can you share a bit of your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Well, one thing we know is fascial tissue, is anywhere from 8 to 10 times more proprioceptive facilitated or aware. And it occurs where it, so like, we know we have sensory and motor loops, right? Well, the fascial tissue, it doesn't have to go to the brain and down. It's a very quick response. Um, if fascial tissue is extensible and fluid and pliable and moving well, in other words, like you and I are sitting right now, if we sit for a half hour to 45 minutes or whatever, the fascial tissue around our hips and our SI joint and our knees and our T spine, everything is going to start to condense because right now we're telling our body that's what we want. We want to be sitting still and not moving a lot. So when people ignore the power of the fascial tissue, I think they're ignoring a very valuable part of feedback. And so when we do these multiplanar um, acceleration into deceleration patterns, we're influencing fascial responses every time. And obviously, we're affecting joints and proprioceptives within a joint and things of that. But the fascial tissue can't be ignored because fascial tissue is almost everywhere in the body. So I think it's pretty important that we understand that part of it.
So you probably already answered this, but can we actually separate fascia from like squatting, deadlift? Can we actually like separate just training the fascia?
That's a great question. And without actually knowing the answer on that, that's a really good question, Eric. I would say no, only because it's our body moves in a system, and even if I were to strictly isolate, let's say a single leg sled squat or a hack squat or whatever, whatever you want to do where I'm just seated and I'm pushing with the one leg, you're still incorporating everything involved from, the muscular system, the fascial system, the joint system, everything's going to be involved. I don't think you can separate that, but I've never actually been asked that and thought of it that way because that's not the way my brain thinks. I think in systems, everything works together and is synergistic to a degree. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I'm sorry to put you in the hard position to
No,
answer that.
I love that. That's a great question. It really is. I think that's what makes us all better is being challenged like that. But yeah, as I think about that, I don't know how you can do that, and maybe there is a way that I'm unaware of, but I'm not sure you can,
Just
just because of how intertwined the fascial tissue is everything, even bone, and so yeah, it'd be tough.
just so you know, like I kind of asked the same question to like Randy Huntington,
Yeah,
Dan Path, all those like legend. They basically like all their answers are basically the same. You can't separate fascia from muscle. But the
yeah,
reason why I still ask is like uh I feel like coaches still need like to look more in depth into those because
yeah,
like you mentioned, like everything like kind of like work with each other.
yeah,
You can't
yeah,
separate one from another. So since that's the case, why is there like nowadays, or I don't know when did they start, but like coaches kind of like separate athlete and categorize them by like more elastic or more muscle based?
yeah, yeah. So, and again, another very important question to understand. So, whether I'm power based or elastic doesn't say or segment fascial versus muscular involvement. It just has more to do with rate coding and the ability to quickly return energy once I touch the ground or push from the ground. So I'll give you a couple examples. So one of the things I do, if I have an athlete that is not performing as well as they could because they're maybe more power based. In other words, what I determine to be power based is not always the speed of the movement, but that is a part of it. But it's also the depth of their joint bending that they need to acquire to feel like they can start moving through space as fast as possible. As where an elastic person, like they can just touch and go. They can touch the ground, don't need a ton of knee bending, not a lot of hips. They just rely on their foot and ankle to be able to produce force and take off. So one of the things that I like to do, Eric, is when I assess that, is I'll have a short box, could be anywhere from 2 inches to 6 inches, and I'll have an athlete jump off and then jump into the air, and that kind of tells me a lot. But the one that really tells me is if they jump off backwards and then jump back onto the box, because it when you jump backwards and you immediately jump back on, you're limiting knee and hip involvement and flexion. It becomes very because my upper body automatically pitches forward and my feet go behind my center of mass, almost like I would be if I were doing a broad jump. And I quickly spring back on. My athletes that are elastic, they just go pop, they hit and they go very light and very quick. The athletes are a little more power based. You can feel them trying to find a little more depth anywhere they can, ankle, knee, hip, and they can't quite get it. They use more arms, they're trying to help themselves. And so not only is that a test I use, but that's the training I use. So my guys that need more power and my gals, I jump them off backwards and back on because I'm limiting their ability to find this depth that they so badly want.
Man, this is smart. I never thought of it this way. That's smart.
Well, it puts it all in the foot and ankle. As where if I go forward and I want to jump vertical, the first thing that touches is my heels because it starts to decelerate my mass from going forward. Because I'm not trying to jump off the box, then do a broad jump. I'm trying to jump off the box, then go vertical. So when I land, I I go heel. My knees start to push forward to create knee flexion, ankle flexion. My hips will counter, move back, and my shoulders go forward. So I get kind of that accordion condensed, and then I load and I explode. So it's going to be a little bit more power based movement just because of mechanics of landing, because the heel touches. Backwards, the heel doesn't touch. It's very rapid, and I'm right into dorsiflexion right off.
Nice, nice. So, um, since we were talking about like elastic or more power based and more elastic, um, I know since there's like tons of technology right now, velocity based training, force plate, 1080, all those stuff. Like I know coaches kind of want to do this load velocity profiling or force velocity profiling for each athlete to see where they at and like where are the weakest point. So
Mhm.
first of all, like I want to start with this. Uh, do you think that's like what we categorize power based or like more elastic? Is it a trainable quality? Like if they're more biased power or if they're more biased like elastic? Is that a trainable quality for like athletes to change their bias?
I do think it is. I think the determining factor is how much is it going to matter if I spend qua- a lot of quantity amounts of my training on trying to get them back. So if we got let's kind of play with numbers for a second. If I have a 60-40 athlete, 60 power, 40 elastic, that, oops, lost my earpiece. That's what we determined, or we found out through force velocity testing or force plates or whatever. And we noticed that. And they play a sport that power, a little more time under tension is really important. And if I spend more time on elastic and less on that power, do I help that athlete? Even though in my retesting, they show, yes, we did. We improved their elasticity, um, but we reduced possibly their performance in their sport because we took that away. So those are the things that I think you got to think about. But I do believe, because I've done it with athletes over the years that I've had for years, that I've been able to take them from a little bit more of a slower rate of force to a higher, quicker, rate of force and improved impulse. And was able to get a better athlete because we just trained those qualities. We can give them constraints. We can limit ranges of motion, but yet still improve pushing a decent amount of intensity or weight. So there's things you can certainly do. But the other thing you got to remember, are we affecting um, that elastic versus power, or power versus elastic, or are we improving skill acquisition of a pattern? Because if the acquisition of skill gets cleaner, it could show like, hey, they got more elastic, but maybe they just learned the skill better. Because a lot of things you and I do in training, it's new to athletes. Like they've never jumped in a particular way on a force plate that we need them to do. Maybe biasing hand action, biasing, upper body position, that in sport they wouldn't do. So it's a new skill. They test and they show us a low power output, lower elastic, low rate of force, RSI, whatever. But maybe their skill acquisition is low. So they're not performing it well. And once they learn how to perform it, those numbers all of a sudden change because they can now. So I don't know if that makes sense, but that's one thing I always look at. Skill acquisition, biomechanical influence, and strength power influences are the three things that I look at. And sometimes it's skill acquisition. Until my athlete learns how to do it well, I'm not going to get the best potential anyway.
Yeah, that totally makes sense because um when we test those athletes, some of them are like future NBA stars. You just
Yeah.
know it.
Oh,
And
yeah.
and and like we were lucky enough like we get to record like how they do these movements,
Yeah.
and you can just saw like because I think it was somewhere around September, so it's just beginning of the season. I I don't think like strength coaches have enough time to do whatever they want,
Yeah.
but you can just see athlete like they move well. It's like when they decelerate, they'll slowly decrease their center mass, and then when
Yeah.
they re-accelerate, they slowly increase. They just have that ability.
Yep. Yep.
So this is another part. So, like you mentioned, like how much of a focus we will put on for those like skill qualities.
The skill qualities of movement.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think what we have to do, we and this is where my thought process sometimes creates controversy in others. I don't always, when I'm going to work on a skill, I let the athlete show me that's the skill I need to work on versus going into a practice with a team, even my basketball team, because I'm a head basketball coach right now, but I do all their movement training and everything. So when I notice as a team, we don't perform a specific skill that's going to make us better movers on the basketball court and perform better defensively or offensively, that's what I address. And sometimes I address it right then and right there at the moment. When I see multiple core, maybe let's use a hip turn, open your hips, cut off space, attack new space. we're not doing that very well. I might do a 30, 45-second, 90-second drill right there. And I talk about, um, I don't always talk about the mechanics. I talk about a process of escaping space and attacking new space, and then how we can do that better. And I'll just talk about maybe a position, like some of them might sit their shoulders back too far versus being a little bit more forward so they can load a different way, a specific way. So if I take that approach, sometimes the skill takes care of itself based on uh, the I guess the skills we're doing in practice. Like if I'm working on defense and I'm working on helping from the weak side, well, there's a footwork pattern you have to use to be able to do that. So my point is, I don't always just say, "Hey, we're going to work on lateral shuffles," and then do that and then go practice. I'm like, no, show me you don't know how to laterally shuffle the way I need you. Then I'll fix that. Because what it does, Eric, is it gives context. And context is one of the greatest learning tools, not teaching tools, learning tools an athlete has. Okay. Because if the athlete says, oh, okay, now I get it, now you just made progress. But if I come out, we warm up and I say, hey, today we're going to work on this lateral shuffle from this line to this line or this cone. The athletes are like, okay, I guess I could do that. And they do it, but they don't really have any context because they didn't understand how to use that shuffle to negate an opponent's pace, an opponent's separation from them or speed or whatever. But once they have that context, then they're like, oh, okay, now I get it, coach. Now I know why you keep telling me to stay in the tunnel or to push harder because I caught him in the moment. It's kind of like catching them stealing, stealing, cookies out of the cookie jar. Like, this is why I just caught you on it. So now they understand it.
Cool, cool. I agree with that. So, this brings me to another question. I know you probably already answered that, but I just want to like probably dive a little bit deeper into this.
Yeah.
So, for acceleration or for sprinting, linear sprinting, you'll hear that sprint coaches will say it doesn't matter how strong you are if you're not landing or if you're not pushing at the right position, you're gonna get hurt anyway. That's for like linear sprinting. Everybody knows that. But why is it like, but when it comes to like deceleration, like why most of the like coaches talk about like how strong is their eccentrician? Not a lot of people discuss or spend time on like deceleration mechanics.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this is the intriguing part of this question. So I told you in the introduction, I was a phys ed teacher. The great thing about being a phys ed teacher in a strength coach is I have like 400 little guinea pigs I get to work with every day. And I get to test a lot of this stuff. And so a lot of the things that I do now as a performance coach, as a speed or a strength coach, well, with my phys ed kids, I taught them how to accelerate, decelerate. We did activities that teach it. And here's the thing. I had some young, scrawny, little skinny leg athletes that were quicker than lightning. They could put their brakes on and change directions as fast as possible and really good. Does that mean being strong isn't necessary? Absolutely not. It doesn't mean that. But what it shows you is strength in some athletes isn't always the determining factor. Sometimes it's just genetic coding. You just see these young kids that are so explosive and they've had no training, but they're just genetically. I was one of them. I was just a scrawny kid, but I was always one of the quickest kids in class. Well, my dad was a phenomenal athlete. My mom was a good athlete. My brothers and sisters were good athletes. We had it. And when I grew up in the 70s and early 80s, strength training really wasn't a big thing for young kids. Nobody did it. So I didn't have that, but yet I had really strong legs. because I used them all the time. I jumped and I ran and I played. So my point being, yes, strength matters, but remember, sequencing and timing of deceleration coupled with positioning matters more because, and if it didn't, if it was only about strength, you wouldn't see the number of ACL injuries in the NFL in non-contact. Just I plant my foot and my knee explodes. These guys are as strong as they get. Other than power lifters, they're right there. These guys are power, but we see ACL, Achilles tendon, MCL, whatever, and they didn't get touched. So we know it's not the strength because they're strong enough because they're squatting 600 pounds. We know that's not the problem, but their sequencing, the coordination of the patterning, and to a degree positioning matters a lot. So I don't think there's a yes, it's only strength or yes, it's only this. I think it's a coupling of everything. But I really believe, I mean, we know a lot of athletes that really don't have a lot of exposure. Dan Taft talks about it all the time. One of his greatest triple jumpers ever could barely lift because he couldn't handle the lifting too much. He had to only go a couple times a week, maybe. Wasn't a lot, and he was what, a 60, 60 meter, you know, uh, triple. It wasn't 60 meter. It was like 60. I forget exactly what it was. His distance, but it was like world record at the time. And he said the guy couldn't lift much. He just couldn't handle it. So yeah, that's kind of my roundabout way of saying I think it depends.
Nice, nice. So one interesting thing that like also like since you're talking about this, I was looking at your Instagram because I remember like when we do the testing, we can see like if they're a good decelerator or good like if the athlete is good at changing direction, you'll see a line that when they change direction, if I'm going out left, you're seeing a line that from the foot to the opposite shoulder.
Yeah.
And I remember you post on, is it Michael Jordan?
Yeah.
Yeah. And you draw those on. I was like, man, like, so tell me this. When you start, you have no velocity based training, no like iPhone, like no whatever it is, no
Yep.
biomechanical lab. How do you know that?
Yep. Yep. And that's how I started because I didn't have any of that stuff. When I first started doing this way back, over 30 years ago, I just developed my eyes. And so here's as much as we talk about athletes, they learn to anticipate and perceive movements happening and they start to reposition their feet to move. Coaches have to be able to start to see that as well. So if I watch an athlete moving laterally or running and they're going to plant their foot and change directions, the minute I see that potential change of direction happen, my mind automatically goes to the plant foot. So the plant foot touches the ground and my eyes automatically go to the upper body. And how is that upper body enhancing the energy, the action reaction forces from that foot plant back up through the body? And I want to see it through that front shoulder, but I also need to know how urgent is that change of direction. So sometimes the change of direction might be literally just an extra half a step just to reposition their body in front of someone, but it also could be now I have to take off and run just as fast the other way. So that plant leg gets greater, the angle gets greater, the tilt angle gets greater, and the obvious lean away from where I'm going gets greater. And so the more you see it, the more you know what should happen. And that's why I always talk to coaches about having models of movement because it's always in your head. So now when an athlete moves, like if you watch somebody do a front squat, well, you have a model of what it should look like. I have models of all the change of directions and accelerations and hip turns. So when I see it, I'm like, oh, there it was. That's why he or she didn't do it well, or that's why they did it well. So that's how I'm able to see it. You can just see the angles going in and out of the ground. And if they over flex, over rotate, over bend, or what I might call swaying or dumping too much, it usually distorts the pattern coming back out of the ground.
So that also goes back to like your seven movement pattern, right?
Yeah.
Like, so recently I've been talking to different coaches about like change of direction, deceleration. Like, you have like those cut, side step, drop step, whatever, like
Yep.
thousands
Yep.
of and like some coaches even like categorize different sport, different change of it. I was like, why do you make things so complicated?
Yeah.
I was and when we talk about those stuff, I was thinking like, man, Lee Taft did a great job categorized like seven movement patterns. Like it's not gonna be like 100% the same,
That's
but
right.
gate cycle is gate cycle, right?
Yep.
Like you mentioned.
Yep. Absolutely.
It's,
Go
yeah.
ahead. Go ahead. Finish
I
up.
think especially for lateral run and like lateral shuffle.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. And here's the cool thing. So I was teaching a baseball player the other day who came in. He's from out of our city, and they came in, and he's a Division I recruit. He's a high school kid right now, and we were working on his acceleration out of getting a jump for stealing a base. And when we first started and we looked at him, I just gave him some common principles that he had to think about. And I always use the phrases, escape your current space and attack new space. Now, what does that mean for you as a base stealer? So we just talked about those positioning, making sure in his case, his left foot drove through his right shoulder. Now, once we do that, what do we do with the rest of the body and how does it fit? So often I'll use a lateral shuffle to solve the issue of not getting lateral translation. So not moving through space. So when I push laterally, like if I'm playing defense and I'm shuffling, that pushes me through space in my new direction. So maybe from left to right or right to left. So I'll use that tool to help them understand that initial push off, you've got to go somewhere. In base stealing, you can't just spin and open up in the same spot. You got to start moving towards second base right off. So the lateral shuffle enhances that. But what the difference is between a shuffle and a lateral run is the casting or pulling back of the lead lower leg. So if I shuffle, I reach so that I can push, pull, recover. But if I'm in a lateral run, I push, open, push because now I'm trying to run. I'm trying to actually accelerate with a running gait. So, but Eric, the first third roughly of a lateral shuffle and a lateral run are identical. So we can train that first third either way. And I use slide boards a lot to help a base stealer, even though they don't slide in base stealing, like on a slide board. That push helps them understand translating. And then we start working on whether we cast the lower leg or we pull it back under so we can push down and under to accelerate.
Gotcha, gotcha. So last thing before I let you go. Um, this has also come from the conversation I had with different coaches,
Yep.
and I'm not gonna say it's stupid, but yeah, whatever. So when we talk about deceleration, like we know that like at the first few, especially for team sport athlete, they accelerate at the first few step and then like they pace it and then decelerate for the last at least last three steps, right?
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong. But like, is there any like is there a scenario that they just keep accelerating until the step they uh decelerate and then just one step deceleration and then change the direction? Is that possible?
Well, it is if their acceleration is very short. Example, um, I'm a outfielder in baseball and I misread the flight of the ball. And my very first two steps, I start accelerating infield, towards the infield, towards the ball. But I quickly realize it's going over my head. I will do what we call a rotational stop or an angle stop. I'll just turn really quick, plant that foot, and go all in that one stop. And I can do that because I haven't built up enough momentum yet. But let's say I did 5 acceleration steps. Now I've got some pretty good mass and momentum working in a direction. So now I'm probably going to go step, step, step as I'm turning, almost like a shuttle run stop, right? 5, 10, or not a 5, 10, like a 5, 10, 15, back and forth, because you're starting to build up more speed. So that would be the determining factor. But anytime, I don't know, I would have to test this, but and I'll tell you about a study that I started. But anytime I'm over 5 yards, you're going to end up taking multiple
Yeah.
steps just because you're really starting to build up just too much more. You're getting too close to your highest maximal speed,
Yeah.
even after 5 yards. You're
Yeah.
really starting to get there pretty quick for most athletes anyway. But so a study that I started doing a long, long time ago, and I sent it out to different coaches to do with their athletes because I needed large populations. Is we were testing if we tested 5 yards, we tested 10 yards, and we tested 15-yard acceleration. Time it. How fast could I go 5 yards? How fast could I go 10? How could I go 15? Then we cut those distances in half and change direction back. So my 5 yard acceleration was 2.5 out, 2.5 back to the start equals 5 yards. And then my 10 yard was 5 out, 5 back equals 10 yards. Then my 15 was 7.5, 7.5. And what I was trying to determine was, does an athlete have the ability to condense the difference in those times? So let's just say it took me, you know, 2 seconds to accelerate 10 yards. How close could I get to 2 seconds if I ran 5 yards out, 5 yards back? And that was, and we tested the right leg plant and the left leg plant. So it started to just give me numbers of this. This is something that we're lacking. Like I can accelerate in 2 seconds, but it takes me almost 4 seconds or 3.6 seconds to get back. Still 5 yards, but my ability. So that to me has a lot of value in this elastic response, positioning on deceleration. And so that was something that I didn't get enough numbers. I got some, and it kind of my hypothesis and my theory of it was kind of being shown. Athletes lacked certain strength on that deceleration ability versus their acceleration ability. So I thought it was kind of a cool study, and I wish I had more population and more time.
Man, that's cool. That's cool. That's actually like because like I just don't think if you can keep accelerating, reach max velocity and change direction in one step. Definitely
No,
when you reach max
no
velocity.
way with max velocity.
Yeah.
That's why in a couple of my uh, teaching courses that I did, we talk about we'll start at different distances. Once, like they'll accelerate to 5 yards. Once they hit 5 yards, they have 5 yards to come to a stop or change direction. If as they get better, then we add 10-yard acceleration and then 5 yard deceleration zone. And then we keep reducing it till eventually maybe they could go 10 yards full speed as fast as they can and still decelerate within 3 yards. And whatever distance, and we varied, of course, based on the kid. But yeah, I think that's an important thing to understand.
Nice, nice. All right, I'm gonna let you go, but before I let you go, I just want to share so for those who are interested in what we're talking about today, for those coaches who want to learn about change of direction, deceleration, you do great posts. Like where can they find those posts? I love those posts. Where can they find
Thank
it?
you. I appreciate it. Yeah, anything on any of the socials, at Lee Taft, they can usually find me. Or the speed guy is, they could find me on that. And if they go to YouTube and just type in Lee Taft speed, tons of videos, tons of older videos that still have a lot of really good strategies to help them. And then, if they were to hit like, leetaft.com or fundamental movement series, we're each month we're getting ready to put out a new one on a 6-week sprint program that I've done for many years. And so they're $20 products that actually it's a course though. It's a mini course and they get to learn. So but yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
Nice, nice. Thank you, coach.